Hi, everyone. I wonder if we should get started. I think we have a very good attendance, which shows that this is an important topic. So thank you to all of you for coming. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to really hearing everyone's views. Just as a quick introduction, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet was launched at the Glasgow COP, really with the view of accelerating the energy transition and making that transition just. And I think this is really why we're here, to figure out, now that we're at this very important pivot point in the world where renewable production is actually delivering more energy than fossil fuel energy production for the first time ever. And second, renewables, most like 90% of renewable projects are actually cheaper than fossil fuel projects. So countries and communities are, from an economic point of view, making choices to adopt clean energy solutions to really power their economic growth. And I think this is where the challenge that we wanted to discuss really lies. How do we enable energy to be the engine of economic growth? How do we make sure that communities, people, businesses that are connected to renewable energy actually realize the benefits of that energy and are able to benefit from access to that energy? There is no rich country today that is energy poor. So we know that we need to drive this important transition. And however, there are many challenges that lie ahead. And this is what we really wanted to discuss. One of the topics is there's a lot of fragmentation, where people are supporting energy projects, and then other people are supporting, for example, agriculture projects, and other people are supporting infrastructure projects or health projects. All of that needs to be integrated. In theory, that's a really great idea, but it's very difficult to do. We have done some work, for example, in Zambia, where we have looked at various World Bank loans that will be coming into the country, and they're all focused on a sector, and energy is seen as a totally separate sector from that. So how do we kind of build coalitions and understand how to connect those dots and build alliances of partners that maybe are not normally working together? So how do we bring in the MDBs, who are still some of the biggest funders in this space? How do we bring in the private sector, who we need to deliver, to implement, and to provide sustainability? How do we bring in civil society so that communities have a buy-in or bought into what the energy solutions are and that they benefit from them? And obviously, how do we enable philanthropy to be the engine that unlocks all of those connections and makes the picture a lot more whole, once again, a lot more beneficial for the communities? So there's three topics that we want to discuss today. The first one is, how do we make electrification a power driver of economic activity? So this is everything from cold storage for fisherfolk to irrigation for farmers, machinery for manufacturers, and connectivity for entrepreneurs. The second topic is energy as economic infrastructure. How reliable power unlocks agricultural productivity, enables small enterprise growth, and creates sustainable livelihoods at scale. Because once again, I think doing this at scale is really key. There are lots of individual pilot programs, but the need is much greater than those programs are addressing. And third, how do we deliver coordinated funding for this transformation? So how do we align philanthropic resources around energy investments that then generate multiplier effects? Job creation, value chain development, and community wealth building. We're very excited to have all of you at the table. And now I'm going to turn it over to Eric Pawlowski, who is the Senior Vice President and Advisor to the President of the Rockefeller Foundation. And he leads all of international policy work at the foundation and has the unenviable job of leading and moderating our discussion. So, Eric, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Sorry. You would think if you can learn how to unmute a Zoom, you can figure out how to work a microphone. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. I would imagine Paris is more persuasive than any other location we could have it. I wanted to start by just saying the Rockefeller Foundation's mission is to promote the well-being of humanity and make opportunity universal and sustainable. And so we see electricity access as one of the most powerful catalysts for both of those goals. We have made a very sizable investment in the global energy, Energy Alliance based on that conclusion. The correlation between energy access and economic opportunity is significant, but delivering transformation at scale in Africa needs something that we just haven't fully achieved yet, which is a true coalition of partners committed to systems-level change, not just one-off projects, but policy reforms, financing mechanisms, institutional strengthening, and bottom-up community support and buy-in that make the actual progress sustainable. And of course, we all know the urgency couldn't be greater. With ODA budgets declining and the traditional aid architecture under strain, we need new models of partnership. And frankly, as this is something that I work on every day, trying to rebuild the momentum for multilateral cooperation and demonstrate why coordinated investment in foundational infrastructure like energy access isn't charity. It's smart development economics. That's why initiatives like this are so important, and I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Since we are still dealing with Paris traffic, we're going to kick off with a conversation with Carol because we're waiting on our delegate from the Ministry of Hydrocarbons of the DRC. So Carol, thrust to the front. You're leading the Global Energy Alliance's work across Africa. Ajay Benga has said repeatedly that Mission 300 is fundamentally a jobs initiative. From your perspective, working across the continent, what does it take to ensure that electrification translates into income generation and economic opportunity?
Okay.
You got to push.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not the only one.
I'm very excited to be around this table to share this very important topic. So if you think about the focus around energy access in Africa, a lot of the efforts so far have been on supply and focusing on connecting people. I mean, we know the statistics, 600 million people still have no access. However, what we have observed as we have done this work is that access alone is not enough. Access will provide a light, and there's requirement to do some additional efforts to ensure that access is actually translating to economic development. We've run a number of programs to try and demonstrate that this is actually true. And we have some case studies in a number of countries in Africa. In Nigeria, we ran a program called Energizing Agricultural Production. And because a lot of the work in Nigeria have been around the distributed renewable energy, which is the mini-grids, we found out that mini-grid developers were providing power but didn't have enough demand. We also found out that a number of distributors of productive use equipment were supplying productive use equipment in places where there was no power. But when we put these two together, where then they were following each other, so that the productive use equipment supplier followed where the mini-grid developer was going, it was almost a perfect match, because then the mini-grid developer solved the demand issue, while the productive use equipment supplier solved the energy issue. It sounds very simple, but reality on the ground is different, and we see different types of uncoordinated programs. So we've seen in some countries where there's a big agricultural program to provide productive use equipment or healthcare equipment, and then usually it will be provided and then it will sit there waiting for energy to come, sometimes for years. And that's really a lost opportunity to create economic empowerment. We also have, done a number of programs focusing around women and youth. We are currently running programs in Nigeria and Ethiopia around energizing women in agri-systems. And we're really looking at the entire value chains, in different value chains. So in Nigeria, for example, we found out that a lot of women who are participating in the fishing were losing a lot of their fish because it would go bad. It's hot and there's no power. But just by providing cooling and refrigeration, they were able to sell their fish at a price that they would, because they could keep it longer. Previously, they would just have to offload the stock, and of course, as you know, supply and demand, they would lose money. In Ethiopia, for example, it's really looking at the value chain and saying, how can energy move the money from the value chain closer to the farmers? Because today, a lot of the money is not made at the farmer level, but it's made up the value chain where value addition is done. So how can we move that money down closer to the farmers to increase impact and obviously create jobs? And so in Ethiopia, we are running a program in the different value chains, but I just wanted to highlight the coffee value chain and really targeting women. And so in Ethiopia, the coffee, if you sell it raw, then there's a minimum, very low price. But if you just add a small value by washing and pulping, then the price goes up by almost 30%. And so we are providing very basic equipment to do the pulping and washing to women, and they're able to increase their income by more than 30%. So those are just some of the examples I wanted to highlight to showcase how, if you combine energy into existing economic activities that people are doing, then there's a great opportunity to increase incomes and really improve livelihoods.
Great, thanks, Carol. Let me introduce our guest from the Ministry of Hydrocarbons in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Director de Cabinet, William Tumawaku. William, thank you for being here. According to the World Bank, 21% of Congolese people have access to electricity, but that means about roughly 41% in urban areas and just 1% in rural areas. The energy deficit is one of the most significant barriers to the DRC's economic transformation and job creation. But given what we know, this is going to change, because under the DRC's National Energy Compact, aligned with the Africa-wide Mission 300 initiative, your government is pursuing ambitious investments and reforms to increase power generation, attract private investors, and strengthen the national utility, with a goal of reaching 62% of electricity access by 2030. And later today, you're signing an MOU with the Global Energy Alliance. So I have two questions with that wind-up. What does this partnership with the Global Energy Alliance mean for the Congolese people, and how do you envision energy access driving economic transformation across the DRC?
Merci, je vais m'exprimer en français.
And thank you. I will speak in French. For the DRC, the mic is not on. The mic is not on. The interpreter cannot hear.
Okay. La RDC a un potentiel hydroélectrique
DRC has a
impressionnant,
hydroelectric power that's
plus de 100
incredible,
gigas.
over 100 giga.
Donc rien à voir même avec les trois gorges de la Chine.
So it's
malheureusement,
even better
comme vous
than
l'avez si bien
the
dit,
Great Dam in China. But as you said
79%
very
de la
well,
population
79%
n'a
of the
pas accès
population
à l'électricité.
does not have access to electricity.
Les taux d'accès dans les zones rurales
Access rates
frisent
in
la folie.
rural areas are
Nous sommes en
insane.
dessous
We
de
are
2%.
below 2%.
Raison pour laquelle le président de la République a
And this
inscrit
is why the
les
President
développements
of the Republic
hydroélectriques,
decided
surtout
to invest in
hydroélectriques,
hydroelectric
parmi
power, mostly hydroelectric,
les infrastructures nationales de priorité.
and that will be a priority for
Et c'est
our
comme ça
national
que, pour
infrastructure.
le moment, le gouvernement fait flèche de tout bois pour
And this is how the
permettre
government is trying
cet
to
accroissement
maximize
en
this
dessert.
potential to increase access to
Nous
electricity.
en voulons au mix électrique, aussi bien par le photovoltaïque que par l'hydro.
We are working on
toute combinaison
hydroelectric
faite,
power and
Le
solar
gouvernement
power,
poursuit d'abord
and
l'électricité
the
par la
government
voie
is
du
also
durable,
pursuing
de manière
sustainable
à
electricity.
arrêter la propension à la déforestation.
We
C'est
are
comme ça qu'on
trying
a mis
to
en
stop
exergue
deforestation
la puissance.
as well.
Des décrets ont été signés.
A certain number of decrees have been
Nous
signed,
passions, à la phase de durabilité.
the idea being to
Les
move
protocoles
towards
d'accord que
more
nous allons
sustainability.
signer
The memorandum of
GA
understanding that we are
tout à
going
l'heure
to sign later on today
s'inscrit dans ce schématique.
is part
Nous venons de
of
terminer la feuille de
this
Et nous sommes en train de
momentum.
tout mettre en œuvre
We finished
pour
our roadmap and we are
passer
trying to
dans
do
la
everything we can
concrétisation du plan
to
du
put into
compact
action
énergétique, M+300,
the Energy
visant à
Compact Plan.
à améliorer la
Its
desserte
goal
des
is
populations
to
à
increase
63% en
energy
moyenne.
access and reach 63%
plan
of access to
ambitieux
energy. It is
qui
an
exige de
ambitious
la
plan,
RDC de disponibiliser
and it
37
requires
milliards
from
de
our
dollars.
country to
Il
mobilize
ne nous reste
$37
plus que
billion.
4 ans.
We only have
Parce que
4 years
le
ahead of
partenariat
us, and this is
avec
why a partnership
nous permettra
with
par l'appui
GEA
technique, surtout l'appui technique,
will help us
mieux
through
suivre le
technical
projet
support mostly
et de
to
pouvoir
better
mobiliser les fonds.
put this
Et nous
project
comptons
into
surtout
action and to better
sur,
mobilize
le
funds.
secteur privé pour
And
pouvoir
we
atteindre cet
count
objectif.
on the private sector
Parce
to
que
reach
seulement
this
l'État ne
goal,
pourra pas.
because
Et
the
pour
state
cela, nous
alone
avons
will not be
besoin
able
des
to
réformes
do
en
this.
profondeur
And so
pour
we need
pouvoir améliorer l'attractivité dans le
significant
secteur,
reforms
de
to
manière à pouvoir
increase
amener les
attractivity
Je crois qu'à ce niveau,
in the
nous
sector so
pouvons-
that we can bring in more private investments. And I think that's all I can say for now.
Thank you, Mr. Thanks, Minister. That's very helpful. Let me ask you if you could talk about sort of how you see specific examples of where electrification is already creating economic opportunity for your people in the DRC.
Les développements économiques
Economic development
par l'apport énergétique
through
ne fait
electrification
l'objet d'aucun doute. Vous
is,
savez, aujourd'hui, on ne peut pas parler de
is a
développement
phenomenon that no one can doubt. You cannot talk about development today. So I come back from the mining region of our country. Without electricity, these mining companies have to import
des mètres cubes par an.
millions of cubic meters of diesel every
Non
year.
seulement ça a un effet délétère
Not only
sur,
does this have a negative impact on the
mais ça
ecosystem,
engendre des surcoûts
it
en production.
also increases their production costs significantly.
Durable pour les populations locales.
Sustainable projects for local populations are hampered because of these cost increases.
Des facilités à l'éducation.
We cannot foster education for local populations because for these populations, the state is not playing its role. It cannot electrify as it should
Dans d'autres régions qui ne sont
in
pas
policy
minières
plans.
pour le moment parce que la RDC regorge
And there are other regions which are not mining regions, yet we have minerals everywhere
qui est taxé dans le
in the DRC.
dans toutes nos régions, surtout dans les zones
But all of our regions, especially in rural areas, in all of these regions, our populations are abandoned, they have no electricity, and without electricity, they cannot benefit from urbanization. And children, of course, in schools, there are limits to what you can do in terms of education without electricity, so they are below the global average. Even access to the internet is limited. When we know that giving access to the internet to populations, to children, gives them access to the worldwide library. There's also an issue with jobs. We're talking about the INGA project, which is the dam project, hydroelectric dam project of the DRC. And on its own, this project could reach 44,000 megawatts of production.
Les possibilités d'emploi sont en centaines de milliers.
And we are talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs as well with this project.
À près d'1 million en induction indirecte.
We're talking about hundreds of thousands of direct jobs and over 1 million indirect jobs. So hydroelectric development is extremely important, and we are making sure that this project succeeds through a roadshow, which is why we need these types of partnerships, so that we can conduct professional roadshows by relying on oligopolistic companies that know what they are doing. We're not going to improvise. And that's what we've decided to implement with some of our colleagues from the Ministry of Petroleum. We're working on partnerships with professionals that will help us benefit from and develop our potential. That's why what we want to do with energy, we want to work with people who are not improvising but who know what they are doing, so that this INGA project, which will benefit all of Africa, can come to fruition, and will also, of course, benefit our country. I hope I've answered your question properly.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Willem. That absolutely answered my question. Let me turn to you, Carol. As you look across Africa, obviously we've had a really dialed-in look at DRC. What other countries do you see sort of leading in either innovation or job creation or the use case? Where else are you seeing across the continent significant progress?
So I think what we are seeing in Africa is progress will be made when there's targeted intervention. Our experience in the countries where we are present and operating has really shown us that there's a lot more work that needs to be done beyond access or even beyond financing. So efforts around building ventures, for example, because at the end of the day, to create a sustainable ecosystem, we must have private sector involvement. And so we see a lot of traction in countries like Kenya, Nigeria, where there's a lot of vibrant ventures developing and also efforts around venture building. And we are also putting in our support into those programs. I think the other additional thing that is required is also skills. So we could provide all the money we can in the world, but there's an element around really creating the capacity of the people to be able to utilize those for economic development. So countries like Ethiopia is also where we are seeing this need critically, and more effort and intervention is needed to really bring out the powerful force that energy can bring in terms of economic development. But also, some other countries where there's plenty of people that are really having no jobs, but also are employed in industries. I mean, a lot of African countries, many people are employed in the agri-space, but most of them are stuck in the subsistence level. and predominantly because the entire value chains are missing the opportunity to really bring value, either because there's losses in food or there's just money going up the chain into the people that are doing the processing and less into the farmers. So I think there's targeted intervention needed, but also a lot of support into innovation on ventures to bring these different elements together.
Great, thanks. Okay, so now we're going to open this up to a much larger conversation. Obviously, what we're hearing is that success requires coordination across sectors. And so we'd like to hear from folks in different quadrants of this space, talk about where we're seeing alignment and what works well, and where the gaps obviously remain. What I thought I might do is start with a little bit of a conversation about the different funding mechanisms. And I always like to pick on William because William and I go back a ways. William, development banks, you're at the EBRD. Development banks are critical to de-risking private investment. From your experience at EBRD, which is only a few months, but also your experience at Tresor, what would need to shift to unlock significantly more private capital for productive use of energy in Africa? And while you're at it, I'll give you the rebuttal, which is, what role can philanthropy play in bridging the gap?
Merci Eric. On peut parler en français ou en anglais ou qu'est-ce qui est le...
Thank you, Eric. Can we speak in French or English? Perfect. So I will speak in French. Thank you for inviting me to do so. I joined the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development 2 months ago, but I will rely on the experience of my many colleagues who have been in the field for many years in North Africa. And also, since our recent expansion in 6 countries of sub-Saharan Africa, I believe that the experience of multilateral banks, the EBRD, and other multilateral banks is to not look at this project on a project-by-project basis. It's easier said than done, but that's usually what we're doing when we're building country strategies, when a country is implementing a country platform, which is even more beneficial, I would say, in order to coordinate the different players, in order to have an integrated action and not only a single project-based approach. It's not enough to fund. It's important, of course, to have funding from multilateral banks, and it's important also to mobilize private capital. But we also have to improve the general business environment in the sector of electrical production, and there's then a trickle-down effect in other sectors. So a lot of work has been done to help with funding, to help with regulation connected to the electricity market. Work is done with public companies which want to purchase this energy which is produced by private actors. We also support for the implementation of tenders to select independent producers. Beyond this aspect which is connected to electrical production and the purchase of electricity, it's also the experience of all development banks with our customers and countries that we need to work on economic diversification, entrepreneurship, and this word has been left behind a bit, but we also like to talk about a just energy transition. In Africa, it's not necessarily a transition, it's more about making more energy available, but the idea of looking at a project and the way it's integrated in a local environment when it comes to added value, the value chain in terms of equipments, in connection with electricity production, in connection with skills, in connection with entrepreneurship and diversification in these areas. I believe that these concepts are still valid. 2 very good examples for our bank. In Morocco, we've participated in the Global Rural Electrification Program, which shows our ambition, which is not simply to produce electricity, but to make sure that this electricity is being used by by the people who actually work in these areas. And in Egypt, we have the Nexus for Water, Food and Energy, which is the country platform, where we see this illustrates this ambition to have a global sector-based vision. We also have actions on the level of financial institutions, local banks, to incentivize them to lend money in connection to these policies that foster renewable energies. That's also the way we work with small, medium-sized companies through the local financial sector. To finish on the topic of sub-Saharan Africa, the bird is extending in Nigeria, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Senegal, Benin, and Ghana. We do this with our partners, the World Bank, the African Bank, other institutions. We also find this interesting in terms of our support to companies in Egypt. We can also help them to develop projects in Côte d'Ivoire, in Benin, with local companies. And to conclude on your question, Eric, on the role of philanthropy,
on peut faire de la mobilisation de la finance privée.
We can mobilize private funding without public funds, but sometimes we also need tools to do blended finance and to properly share risk. And in that regard, donors play an important role. One of the conclusions, however, is that we need to support the countries themselves and develop their capabilities, their technical capabilities, human capabilities, their ministries. I believe that developing their own platform is really the heart of the issue here.
Thanks, William. That's great. It makes a lot of sense to me. Haya, can I turn to you, if it's okay? The Qatar Fund for Development has made a number of key contributions towards building climate resilience and sustainable economic growth in regions affected by climate change. I'm curious what you have learned from those efforts and how you would leverage strategic partnerships to make progress, particularly as you try to address vulnerable communities.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad that, I'm speaking after the panelists have taken. Carol has talked to us about, targeted interventions, and that's exactly what we do in terms of, first of all, in rapid response and humanitarian assistance, but also in our long-term commitments and development goals globally. And then, an early congratulations to the DRC for the signing agreement today, which is extremely important because when we interact with any project, we ask ourselves three things. We ask ourselves, is it bolstering or strengthening countries' sovereignty and governance? Is it sustainable? And sustainable means a lot of things for Qatar Fund for Development. It first means, is the project itself sustainable? Is it, are there elements of it that will serve the community for long term? But also, is the funding mechanism sustainable for long-term, circulation and scaling up, hopefully? And then finally, we ask ourselves, does this also uphold or strengthen the dignity of the people or the country involved? And so once we go through all these three elements, we then proceed with whatever project we do. But if you allow me, just before I talk about the climate portfolio of Qatar Fund for Development, energy as a whole is a major sort of pillar of the fund and how we operate, but it's also a major component and driver or tool of Qatar as a country. And we can see that very clearly in the Syrian interventions that have recently happened. So the major project that was signed with Syria or for support and in aid of Syria was the energy portfolio or the electricity provision. And that's for a multitude of reasons. First of all, it's an emergency, it's an urgent need for the people of Syria. There were critical requirements for hospitals and for schools to operate. So that was sort of the first line of intervention. But also that project shows how we work through partnerships to be able to deliver on our projects. You know, the Jordanians are involved, Azerbaijan is involved, Turkey is involved. So it's really a hands-on approach to development and to providing energy as a resource. And we have now a loan agreement with Oman also in 2025. We also are operating in Niger, and these are all current new 2025 projects. But our portfolio goes way back, you know, and energy has always been a commitment that we have tried to uphold in terms of providing and supporting countries to do that. And that's why truly the DRC and the role that the government is playing, Your Excellency, is vital, because it shows confidence. You know, ownership of the government for certain projects really does attract others to follow suit and to support, especially if that's, you know, incorporated into the strategic goals and plans of the country, but also in the budgeting of the country, which is a major undertaking by countries, you know, globally, and so that's an important part of what we do. But on climate, our climate portfolio is quite vast, and it's quite, you know, expansive. It covers all regions of the world. At this point, we have a commitment, a grant commitment that we're also working currently off of from His Highness the Emir, 400 million in support of climate initiatives globally, and that's to target specifically LDCs. So it's very much aligned with our priorities in support of LDCs globally, but also obviously a pillar of our national vision, which has and holds climate as a major component and deliverable, you know, advancement of climate initiatives. So that's sort of in sum how we operate. In terms of partnerships, partnerships are the way we operate. Qatar Fund for Development is a facilitator. We provide, you know, the funds fundamentally, but we also provide technical support to some extent. However, the majority, if not all, our projects are delivered through partners. The exception to that is, you know, government-to-government agreements in which we sign for loans and guarantees and the like. And so the integrity and the strength of our partners is, you know, the strength and integrity of our operation. And so we try to support them and also try to keep them, you know, honest in their work. Yeah.
That's super helpful. Thank you. So let me now move us a little bit on to the next sort of topic that we wanted to cover, which was energy as an economic infrastructure. We often treat infrastructure, whether it's telecom or roads, as a special category that's an essential for an economic growth and economic prosperity. The question we ask ourselves is, what would shift if we treated energy like roads and telecom, the essential infrastructure of an economy? So we thought we might ask a few of you to consider what would that mean, and what would the impact be? So Pauline, perhaps I could turn to you. Development funding is also siloed with health, education, energy as separate buckets. From AFD's perspective, what does it take to align these investments so energy is seen as the foundation of all of those categories and overall development outcomes?
Hi, good morning, bonjour. Je pense que, comme William, je me permettrai de parler en français pour répondre à cette question.
Good morning. I believe I'll be speaking English to answer this question, and thank you again for asking this question. At the AFD, it's very simple for us. Energy is not only a sector, it's a driver, it is a foundation to fund social sectors, education, health, but more globally, economic growth. And this is how we believe that we'll be able to reach the goals established by Mission 300. And for this, we have to make sure that internally, but also when we discuss with our partners, that the financing that we're proposing are fully integrated in terms of energy efficiency with all the programs that are being developed by the AFD, so that we have so that it can be the true basis for development. According to us, what is required are three things. First, access must be productive. Second, we need to encourage local financing as well. And we have to reinvent our paradigms and how we work together and coordinate our economic efforts. As a reminder, how do we build our access programs? Two examples, Madagascar and Côte d'Ivoire. We work with public society and with private sector and with NGOs locally to understand how we can connect with different players. We work in construction and health. We work on hospitals so that they're energy efficient. That means more comfort for patients. That means it's less costly. It's better for the environment, and so better for everyone's health. And so we see how electricity and access to energy can be a driver for health. We also work with local startups to show how technology can be a connection between energy and social impact, particularly everything that has to do with smart electric cooking, apps that can allow you to control irrigation so that you can have a better harvest, etc., etc. And so every time we're working with small SMEs that work locally and they understand the local needs, and this is how we can have a true impact. Now, how do these local and transversal approaches can be scaled up? This is how this is why we're here. We want to scale those things up. So we need more local financing and more public leadership and public policies. It has been said financing to universal access is not profitable. We have to encourage demand, and so we work with thwart and with local banks, local financing systems, so that we can see how those key local actors can fund more directly productive energy systems, value chains, etc., and how this can all be mapped out with access programs. And for this, it echoes back to the more larger conversation that we can have with the compacts that are being created through Mission 300, and particularly the one in DRC. And it connects back to the country platforms as well, but it's all connected, and particularly with public banks, public development banks locally, which can have a mandate given to them by the government. If the government has a political vision, it can guide financial flows towards demand, and that can help move things along. And at the AFD and through our network Financial Command, we believe that it's key to work to empower those players so that they can work on those new financing models, and they can work with other players. And I also want to mention that at the next COP, we will launch a coalition dedicated to energy within the banks that are part of that network of public development bank, so that we can see how in Africa particularly we can reach our goals of Mission 300. And I invite all the people around the table to join us in this coalition if you're interested. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Maybe I should use that your reference to the COP to come to Minister Babayev. I'm curious how you see all of this as the opportunity to leverage energy as we reach or as we strive to reach our climate goals. You had the entire weight of the world sitting on you for an entire year on the climate goals. Now that you've been somewhat released, or you're about to be with the new COP president, how do you see using energy as a tool for achieving our climate goals?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. And thanks for giving me the chance to also deliver our expectations from the further development in energy supplying in Africa and other continents. Unfortunately, especially in developing world, more than 50% of the population has no access to electricity. And for COP29 team, for Azerbaijani team, and for other COPs, I think it will be priority in next period of discussions, negotiations regarding the energy transition and energy supply. At the same time, we understand that it is so now it's so important now to prevent the step backs from the decisions made on previous COPs, because a lot of very important decisions made at COP28 regarding the energy transition, at COP26 and COP27 regarding methane emissions and other, at COP29 a lot of decisions regarding the climate finance. Unfortunately, some of the donors already decided to reprioritize their contributions and assistance to the developing countries. Without this support, it will be so difficult to perform these programs, because we are talking about Africa, we are talking about the developing world. Unfortunately, today we have less and less access to the financial resources from one hand. Another one very important issue is the very complicated and long procedures of the consideration of the documents. I mean, it is so important now also to consider the reformation of the architecture of the access for the climate finance. That's why today it is so important to have all the stakeholders on board, and we need to be more emotional and more, we need more pressure to the financial institutions, to MDBs, to donor countries to assist to perform these programs. I mean the energy supply for Africa and other developing countries. At the same time, it is so important now to consider how the African countries can cooperate on the regional basis to perform the different energy projects. Just 1 month ago, I visited Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and we also took part in the opening of new dam on Nile, 73 billion cubic meters of the water, and around 5,000 megawatts of the electricity generation. Please imagine, huge, the biggest in Africa, biggest than Aswan, and 14 years construction. Please imagine. Unfortunately, Ethiopia performed this big project alone, without any assistance, with own resources. But the usage of this electricity is possible for the countries of the region. That's why it is so important to consider how the countries on the regional basis can cooperate in this big project, energy resources, energy distribution systems, expansion, and other projects. That's why I think the focus for multilateral discussions for the COP process, it is so important to focus to prevent any step backs from the decisions regarding the finance support. At the same time, to consider how to invite more and more countries of the continent for the regional cooperation, including participation of the international financial institutions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Minister. And thank you for your service as our COP president. Let me turn to Rosalind. CIV thinks deeply about what works for children and families across a huge swath of different categories. When you look at energy access investments, what's the difference between those that create lasting economic opportunity versus those that just provide a service? How do you evaluate those kind of projects and those kinds of decisions?
Thanks, Eric, and thanks to GAP, to Rockefeller, and to PPF for bringing us together for this conversation. I mean, I think it's been touched upon by a number of different speakers here that I think we really need to think about this question of institutional strengthening. You know, I think there's a real risk that as philanthropy, as the private sector, even as external donors, that we come in with this, you know, band-aid effect, right, to do the short-term service delivery that, of course, is impactful for the children, the women and families, the communities in any given setting. But if we're not thinking about that long-term institutional capacity, I think we're really doing ourselves and the broader communities that we hope to ultimately benefit a disservice. I mean, I think just a couple of things to build on from the conversation. You know, SIF works primarily around some of the sectoral interventions, and I take Agnes's point around the need to make sure that we minimise the fragmentation if we're working across multiple sectors, but, you know, recognising that any one set of stakeholders will have particular priorities. So, you know, our focus is on clean cooking, on investment in schools and clinics as institutions that have a particular impact on the lives of women and girls, and then thinking about how we develop the institutional capacity and the energy access for those institutions, to the point that our colleague from DRC was making earlier around the importance of education as a driver of economic growth and population well-being. I think the next piece, and William touched on this, is, you know, we certainly see the value of utilising country platforms in their very many different iterations as a model for how we make those investments, so that we're not projectizing, you know, going back to the Band-Aid analogy, but really thinking about how we are aligning with country priorities and then doing some of the sectoral division of labour within that. And then again, to our colleague from Qatar, to think about how we're developing the delivery capacity of those sovereign stakeholders. You know, how are we thinking about delivery units? How are we thinking about procurement systems? These are not the sexy parts of development, but really are critical to that long-lasting sustainability. And maybe then the final thing I'll say here is, I do think we need to bring an element of finance realism to these conversations. You know, we've talked a lot about blended finance so far and private capital mobilisation. The word I've not really heard is debt, and I think we need to be thinking about some level of debt awareness as we are designing the energy access interventions, because if we are blind to the debt context in which many countries are operating, and we're just loading on additional debt, you know, I don't think we're actually addressing the sustainability question that we talked about. So yes, absolutely, align external donors, bring in private finance, including philanthropy, but do it in a way that creates sustainable debt, sustainable kind of capital flows for those countries. So, you know, I think the more that we need to go upstream to some of these questions, I think we really need to guide the discussion. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Rosalind. And for those of you who don't know, Rosalind and I have spent many hours, days, weeks, months working on the finance piece of this, and I think the partnership that SIF and Rockefeller have on those issues, and before that with OSF and Gates, has been tremendously productive in terms of adding to the balance sheets, and William knows this, to the balance sheets of the World Bank and to the regional development banks through the capital adequacy frameworks. Let me shift us a little bit. We've talked a lot about how the Global Energy Alliance was founded on the idea of working through coalitions and sort of thinking about how one puts together that coalition. I'm curious if I could call on, and by the way, we're going to open it up, so if you want to speak and you haven't been called on, don't fret, just put up your sign so that I can see you and call upon you. Alice, you led MCC, which played a leading role in compact-based development. What lessons do you think that model offers to the Mission 300 and sort of the coalition to deliver energy access?
Thanks, Eric. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for including me. So for those who don't know, very briefly, MCC was created in 2004 by President Bush, and since its founding, the agency has, and it still is in existence, The agency has deployed about $17 billion only in grants across multiple sectors, and a substantial portion of that has been in energy. And while I was there, in one way or another, I got involved in energy compacts in Nepal, Benin, Sierra Leone, and Senegal. So I was really able to see at a very detailed level, how the agency went about it. Just a couple thoughts on this question of shifts, investability, equity, and how energy drives economic growth. MCC's whole framework is based on only doing projects that have a positive economic rate of return for the country. So we would only get involved in projects where there was going to be positive economic growth. And in the case of energy investments, we thought well beyond just the grid or just the transmission and distribution lines, but looked at where did the transmission and distribution lines that we are investing in, where would they reach particular populations that were left out? And that's how the programs were in fact designed. So we took a very holistic approach. We first of all assessed energy grids, energy sectors as a whole, and figured out, on the one hand, why they were not attracting private capital at the generation end, and the result of that work was often adjustments in the regulatory environment in a country to make different rate change and other policy changes in order to attract more private capital. We also then invested in grid infrastructure to get the grid to places where it needed to be. And we asked ourselves, unless the fisher folk women were not able to have cold storage, unless schools were not able to have light, unless hospitals and clinics were not able to stay on, we weren't doing a good enough job. We also spent, and this is the last point I'll make, one of the things we thought was very promising were energy exchanges and power pools. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with the West African Power Pool. MCC had invested in 11 of the 13 countries that were members of the WAP in order, from different perspectives, to get the entire pool to be exchanging energy, taking advantage of different types of sources of energy that different countries had, and really improving on reliability. So my thoughts going forward are taking a holistic approach that includes policy issues and reach issues, and equity issues are critical, so it's well beyond the grid. And it's also, I think, I agree with what you had said as well about the demand side. You can begin to also put in place programs to help different communities that are rural and not reached understand what energy can do for them. And we did this in a program in Senegal, in Casamance, which was very energy poor. So I would recommend thinking about things in a very holistic way and getting at it well beyond just where were the transmission lines.
Great, thanks, Alice. So let me come to you, Matt. The Aga Khan Development Network operates a truly integrated approach across health, education, and economic development. What have you learned about working in coalitions or alliance across different actors, and where do you see the tensions typically rise, and what do you do to navigate them?
Thanks a lot. I was just thinking about some of the opening comments about energy being fundamental to development. This is something that His Late Highness the Aga Khan thought for a very long time. We've been working in energy for 40 years at least. And that came through an engagement with communities first. I mean, our approach starts in communities, asking them what they need. And of course, as you can imagine, one of the things that they say very quickly that they need is access to energy. So we got involved early on in very small scale hydropower in rural areas, that sort of thing. But I was just totaling here. I wasn't actually prepared to talk about this aspect, but I was just thinking through about how much money we've mobilized, invested on our own and mobilized. If you think about right now, we have about 1,000 megawatts under management of electricity in Africa and Asia, another 1,000 megawatts in development. We did the first public-private partnership in energy in Africa, in Kenya, about 30 years ago. We are currently actually working with the minister on a very complicated project in the DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi called Ruzizi, actually, which I'll say something about in a second. So we've probably, if I just off the top of my head, I think we've invested about $500 million of our own money in developing these projects, and that's probably leveraged $1.5 or $2 billion of energy financing. Highly, highly, highly complex because they're public-private partnerships. I actually think we should, in fact, projectize a little bit more what we do, because I think one of the biggest challenges now is not the access to capital for energy in Africa or in Asia. The biggest challenge is finding projects that are investable and are ready. My colleagues, as I was preparing today to think about this, they said, okay, you need to tell them talk about Ruzizi and tell them how complex it is. So if you don't mind, if I just say a little bit. So this is a 206 megawatt hydropower plant on the border of 3 countries. It's going to be a public-private partnership, a concession for 25 years. We tendered for that in 2011. We won the tender in 2011. So then after 7 years and 16 agreements negotiated with 3 countries, we actually signed in 2019. Since then, we've done 30 different feasibility and environmental studies and all the rest. We've gone through the World Bank's process. We're ready to tender, et cetera. Of course, in the meantime, we've had conflict in the DRC and Congo, which has, as you can imagine, complicated things tremendously. Ruzizi is actually cited in the peace agreement as one of the projects for economic development. But one of the challenges is, as we were doing this, so not only is it getting all of that together, we have 2 things happening. So we're the private sector promoters in that project. We have, in effect, underwritten for 15 years. We've underwritten the project development costs. We've had a little bit of support from KfW and IFC and the Norwegians along the way, but most of it has been us. We've probably invested, just in the last 5 or 6 years alone, we've invested $15 million of our own money. Who else is going to do that? I mean, we're our group is run as an enormous social business, so it's for development, but it's for profit, but for development. So I think the big, and as we're putting those things together, then you had a whole layer of advisors to different governments saying, well, actually, you should start renegotiating your contracts. So then you get involved in that. So it's highly, highly complicated. So I think from our perspective, what we really do need, and I think where philanthropy and others can come together, is actually helping put together a pool and choosing a set of actors to help develop these projects. We could develop many more projects if we had more capital to do so, meaning at the front stage, right? And I think there are other developers out there who could do that. So I'm sorry to belabor the point, but I think it's important to sort of unpick a little bit where some of those challenges are. I very much liked what our colleague from Brazil had to say about let's think seriously about how we can decomplexify this and get things done faster, because that's really, really what we need. And so while it's important to look at the policy environment, and I think it's important, obviously, to put together capital stacks and all the rest, from our perspective, the biggest challenge right now is just getting things done. And so that's one of the things that it's the thing that we've tried to focus on the most.
And I will be brief. Well, I am Kadri Simson, and 2 years ago I was representing the European Commission at COP28 when we proposed that we should triple worldwide renewables by 2030. And our aim was to cover the growing demand for energy with renewables, because in many cases they are the cheapest ones, And by doing so, we avoid adding fossil fuels to the grid. In Africa, based on IEA study, the grid connection capacity was 260 gigawatts in the beginning of this decade, and it might increase. It might also almost double. Of course, well, South Africa, who already has 60 gigawatts, or Egypt, almost 60, they are the fastest growing markets because there you can find the investment-ready projects. For us, the Northern African countries combined and South Africa were the main energy cooperation partners. For South Africa, we introduced JET-B program, Just Energy Transition Project, where we mainly will target transmission and distribution lines. So if you invest into the transmission and distribution, you might help them to get over this load shedding issue. And of course, bringing online more renewables. And in Northern Front, governments and project developers are very much interested about connecting their electricity market towards Europe. So underwater cables. Why I actually asked the floor, I wanted to share with you that European Commission, together with African Commission, whom we know African governments have not delegated the same powers as European governments had. But we are working together to create a pan-African electricity market. Because European consumers each year, they save billions of euros because our electricity market is interconnected. And you can basically cover the demand relying on your neighbor's production. In Africa, this is the case, like as Alice mentioned, in some power pools, but the European Commission has seconded experts to African Commission to help create also the rules so that one day Africa will have a single African electricity market. Thank you.
Great. Why don't we stay in Northern Europe, and let me come to Johannes.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe it's best to continue with Katri's words. So the European Union has been active recently in funding African energy projects. And just 3 weeks ago, there was announced 618 million euros package to scale up renewables in Africa. That was at the Global Gateway Forum. And this is, as we have heard already in the discussion, that we need more renewable energy generation, better transmission and cross-border electricity trade. And to have these sustainable effects of all these investments, we have to have also this local employment, local business climate, and that entrepreneurship developed at the same time, so that they are not something huge investments coming from abroad or outside, and then what stays there is only collecting money to pay back all the investments. So you have to have a local ventures, services, maintenance, construction of grids and security and so on. So that would help to have these sustainable effects, that if from the beginning there would be some local, regional part of the investment of the project. So it's a kind of an inclusive way of working. Finland has quite a small development fund, FinFund. So we have had one major or two major wind power projects in Africa, Lake Turkana in Kenya. I think it was the biggest one, wind power project in Africa. And there the FinFund was partner with this partner, sold it further to Climate Finance Partnership, BlackRock fund, and there we can see that if with the public money, public funding, we can create something also bigger or smaller. So then the private money is more interested in quite ready projects. So what is lacking is this development of these projects, technical aid to develop them to a feasible level, feasible stage. And that was also already discussed that also this International Development Bank and especially private banks, if they are involved, so they need much work before that. So that is where we need more interest in that. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me turn to Sikama, who represents some sovereign wealth funds.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you for the invitation. Minister Sheikh Al-Thani, allow me to congratulate in French mon confrère de l'autre rive pour le partenariat.
My colleague for the GIAP partnership. We expect a lot from the DRC, so congratulations for this partnership.
In three main points. So the UpSwift network is an international coalition of sovereign wealth fund managers and private equity firms focusing on value creation and sustainability. We have been founded by sovereign wealth fund mostly in the Gulf region, and Qatar Investment Authority is one of our esteemed founding members. To echo the points raised by Carol on targeted approach, I will highlight three main points. The first one will be for African countries to have a dual financing strategy in two parts. First is to mobilize more domestic capital and to tap into the 4 trillion capital of institutional investors in Africa, whether they are pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and insurer. No other region in the world has tackled the infrastructure issue without mobilizing domestic saving and domestic capital. And it's actually one of the most strategic enablers for global private capital to come on the ground in Africa. If you see champions and leaders winning on the ground on their own market, it will drive interest and momentum from other partners. The second one obviously will be to attract more patient capital, global capital from institutional investors and sovereign wealth funds that are increasingly looking for diversification and risk-adjusted rate of return. And African countries needs to make energy investments more predictable, scalable, and bankable, and all of us around this table can actually support government effort in that regard. At UpSwift, we are currently working on an investment platform fit for purpose for sovereign wealth fund equity capital deployment to actually trying to bridge that gap. My second point will be addressed to multilaterals and philanthropic organizations. I think we need to rethink their action and for them to not compete with private sectors, but to actually stand along governments as strategic enablers. You mentioned several initiatives, but to work closely with government on grid studies, on project preparation facility, on helping building local capacity within governments to actually structure better PPAs, to also working with local utilities that are facing liquidity issues. So I think there's a whole reflection to have on how we can create financial tools to actually recapitalize local utilities. But the grids and transmission line are obviously the main strategic enablers, and with the momentum of PDBs and MDBs capital around Mission 300, I think that should be the main focus. And the last point will be on ambition. With Mission 300, we have a focus on Africa that we have not seen during the past 20 years. I think the last time we have such a momentum on Africa was for the cancellation of debt at the beginning of this century. It's a one-in-a-generation opportunity, so in terms of ambition, we should aim higher. Obviously, connection is great, access is great, but the ultimate goal should be industrialization. we need to power industrial capacity to actually create high-value jobs in Africa and to allow transformation in Africa and building more resilient economies. So it's very important to focus on the last mile solution, on connectivity, on how we can change the life of people. But we should aim higher in terms of capacity, in terms of building the grid, in terms of aiming for large IPP project. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Sakima, that's great. Thank you very much. So we're really going to have to do lightning interventions. So why don't I come to Caroline, and then Khalil, and then our colleague online from Swiss, Frank. But I just asked, like, with apologies, 30, 45 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will be super quick. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Avant, and I'm with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. We are a global human rights organization, and we are looking at the role and responsibilities of companies in energy transition. So I just wanted to just highlight one thing that we've been looking at recently, which is around how companies can support shared prosperity outcomes through looking at local co-ownership and revenue sharing mechanisms in wind and solar operations. And as we are talking about sustainability of operations in renewable energy projects, this is something that we have found in our research as a key driver of local acceptance and sustainability. So in Africa, these approaches are being tried and tested. We have looked at South Africa, which has, through its independent power producer procurement program, has initiated this discussion through public auctions and requirements on community trust being in place and other mechanisms for revenue sharing. Of course, it comes with challenges and opportunities, but that's just a call to look at these mechanisms as funding is being developed. So that's to philanthropy and development banks. Thank you.
Perfect. Awesome. Khalil.
Thank you. Khalil Radigi with the One Campaign. We are present in Africa and in the G7 countries. And what strikes us about this agenda is what you said, Matt, about the importance of changing how we operate on project preparation. So we're very interested in follow-on conversations from development banks in particular about what could be the light at the end of the tunnel for actual step change on that. And also with development banks, we've heard a lot about the importance of enabler policies that actually convert energy into, job creation, wealth creation. It's very difficult, as we know. I mean, it's for any government on the planet to live by that, dream of being holistic in everything you do. How can we, how can development banks work better with priority countries into having more structured, more ambitious conversations about precisely that? What do they need in order to be able to roll out not necessarily perfectly holistic enabler policies, but at least a package of enabler policies that will achieve this conversion, like skills training, all of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Frank, close us out.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to talk briefly about the role of sovereign donors, which has not been mentioned much so far. And as you are all aware, ODA is drying up. And if we look at the fiscal space and challenges that the traditional donor countries are facing, it is not likely to rebound in the coming years. And the lesson for us here in Switzerland is that we need to cooperate closer with MDBs, as we have already in the past, but I think there's still more room, and also with philanthropy, which we are starting now. And I just wanted to say that we are very open. It is not a natural combination, I would say. We're still in the process of figuring out how we can combine each other's strengths in the best way possible. And lastly, also, we have been talking about numbers, access to electricity. One focus here in Switzerland is also not just the pure scale, but also to have equitable access to electricity. And therefore, we focus especially on those who are hardest to reach, which I think is one of the unique features of ODA, that we can afford to really focus on those who are most vulnerable and who might also benefit the most from access to electricity and the economic opportunities it brings. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks for the brevity at the very end. I appreciate that very much. Let me turn it back to Agnes to wrap it up.
Thank you very much. Natalie, do you want to say just quick? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. So first of all, I'm going to be really quick because we're way over time. And I have a couple of really quick reflections. One is that, we talked about how renewables are cheaper. Countries really need them. We heard about the readiness of Africa and the demand that exists there. The demand is huge, because the one thing that I did not say in my opening remarks that I think is something that we should all really realize is that 1 billion youth is about to enter the job market in developing countries in the next 10 years. Only 30% of them will find jobs. So this is a huge issue, and energy as a constraint to economic growth is right at the center of that. So I just want to bring us back to why we're all here and why we're doing this. What do we need to do? We need to decomplexify. Something that's kind of a little bit disheartening that I found personally from this conversation is, I was part of Power Africa. I was part of driving the private sector engagement, and this was almost 10 years ago, and we had the same conversations, right? Like, we talked about Razizi, we talked about need to improve bankability of projects, we talked about needing to bring in more institutional investors, but yet 10 years later, we're having the same conversations, right? So something is not going right, which means we need unnatural partnerships. I like what Frank just said, right? The way we've partnered before is just not working to deliver this at scale. So we need partners who normally would not be working together to work together. So with that, I want to invite everyone to first, we are helping build institutional capacity in these countries to support Mission 300 delivery. We're going to be setting up to 15 delivery units that will often build on units that already exist within these governments to accelerate energy projects, both off-grid and on-grid. This is what we're going to focus on with the DRC. So if you want to help us build government capacity, please come speak to us. The second one is local ownership is not just governments, it's also local entrepreneurs and local companies. Those local entrepreneurs, SMEs, are those who are going to create jobs. So we're launching a coalition that we're calling Energy and Opportunity, which is putting energy at the center, but really working with the private sector, working with corporations, working with small businesses that are parts of supply chains to really deliver economic growth, jobs, and extra incomes to the communities that are being connected. So we really welcome partners, even partners that are not focused on energy, especially partners that are not focused on energy, to really join us in launching this coalition, but really working together and figuring it out, maybe first in a few pilot countries of how to do this well, and then scaling it up. So we're definitely open to collaboration. The theme of the Paris Peace Forum is new collaboration for peace, people, and planet. So let's form a new collaboration that is maybe not a natural collaboration, and let's have new solutions for new problems. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for coming.